Welcome back, everybody. This is Tucker. Let's talk weather. Today, we're breaking down a severe weather outbreak expected next week. We are analyzing the biggest risks, including strong tornadoes and damaging wind gusts for a large portion of the country. And if you avoid the severe weather, major temperature fluctuations are still ahead, and we'll talk about where it may bring some late season snow. Hey everybody, welcome back in. Hopefully you're enjoying some of the mild weather that's returned to the country. I'm a big snow guy, but it's hard to hate some of the warmth after it's been a kind of chilly winter in a lot of spots. Anyway, I really want to jump into this forecast. It is a more serious forecast, especially with how the forecast has been trending. If you watched my last video, you were aware of this a couple days ago, but I want to get into a significant severe weather threat and a likely severe weather outbreak as we take a look at March 4th and 5th. So the Storm Prediction Center has already issued a threat zone for next Tuesday. I told you again a couple days ago this was a good move as we are looking at very ample ingredients for severe weather in this area outlined in yellow, and you can see that it's a very broad area expanding from Dallas out through almost Asheville, North Carolina. In the middle of it, we have a higher risk zone, and to be honest, to see this orange color, this level 3 out of 5 risk, 5 days out, 6 days out is a big deal. You know, that tells us that there are a lot of ingredients available, and some of the people at the Storm Prediction Center are seeing high potential. And I do too. We're going to dive into what I'm looking at in this forecast, of course. Our next threat is the next day. This is the 5th. We still have that level 2 out of 5 risk here, but again, for a little under a week out, that's a big deal to see this wide an area under this level risk. And of course, as you might imagine, the only reason that these are separate is because the severe weather threat is for 2 separate days, but it's the same system, just continuing for about 48 hours. This reaching, of course, the East Coast and almost as far north as Washington, D.C. So a big portion of the country under the gun for the potential of damaging wind, but especially tornadoes. And a tornado outbreak is certainly a possibility with this. So let's jump into what I'm seeing with the forecast to make sure you're ready for what may be coming very soon. All right, guys, we're going to start by breaking down the jet stream. And it looks pretty crowded here. This is your polar jet. You can see zipping across the northern U.S., and your subtropical jet zipping through the south. These jets are going to stay separate, but as we move into next week, you're going to see that subtropical jet do something more interesting here. And it's right here. You can see those colors get a bit brighter. That jet becomes more pronounced and curved, and that's where our severe weather threat really begins. And by the way, before we get too deep in here, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification button, because I'll be covering this very closely over the next week, and we'll do some live stuff too. If you want to do some Q&A, I'll be here. But regardless, this is what we call a trough, and it's colder air in the atmosphere basically bowing southwards, and the wind around that trough really picks up as it's squeezed into a smaller area. And when that occurs, you're able to drive a lot of wind energy through the middle of the atmosphere, and when you get storms to form, that wind energy gets translated to the surface. So when you get this strong jet streak, as we call it, and divergence, that's a really ripe atmosphere for rising motion that creates storms, and that wind energy to drive potential for damaging wind and even generate some spin in the atmosphere for tornadoes. So that's our threat. You can see that jet continues to move east, and eventually it does reach the East Coast too. Of course, we need more than just wind energy for storms, and in the winter we don't have a lot of instability, but you don't need a lot when you have an excess of wind energy. So I'm going to show you now the instability, and where that strongest wind energy and instability crossover is ultimately where we're going to get that biggest severe weather threat. I mentioned this before. I wouldn't be shocked if there is a lower severe weather risk here on the 3rd. This would be on Monday, of course. Could be across portions of Texas, but it is the 4th that we begin to see that instability increase. Anywhere you're seeing those green colors, that's pretty unstable air, and it becomes much more broad as well. So especially in the middle of your day here on Tuesday, you can see ample instability for severe weather all the way into northern Missouri, northern Kansas. You can see our front cuts off the instability, our dry line actually, to the west, but this is still a very large area here that is facing the potential for severe weather. And you can see it peaks across eastern Texas. We got Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri out there as well, and this is just during the daytime as this threat will continue to move to the east. But certainly those numbers cross over perfectly with where we're seeing that jet streak roll through, and this is certainly an area that will be facing some really dangerous weather, of course, because both of those parameters are in place. Now here's where it gets more interesting overnight. You'll see as we move into Wednesday, and I'll switch our view to a more east-centric view, We lose the instability because the sun sets, of course, but there is still a little bit out there. So I expect this threat will continue along the Gulf Coast pretty much the entire night. I would not be shocked if we're tracking tornadoes all night long along the Gulf coastline here. My biggest question is what happens in the middle ground here. We need that energy to be more surface-based to get tornadoes. And even if it's not, we could still get some damaging wind. And my thoughts are that overnight, if you're not closer to the Gulf Coast, this is going to end up becoming more of a damaging wind threat. But it's something that we'll be watching and I'll be updating you on as we get more data in the days ahead. But as we move farther into your Wednesday, that's when, of course, you see that instability flare back up. The sun's out again, and we have the potential for severe weather, at least across a good portion of the East Coast here. I'm not sold yet on how much we're going to see up into like Ohio, for example, but it's an area that is not completely out of play and something that we'll watch. I'm not as concerned about a significant threat out there, but there could be some severe weather. It's more so out here where we have that greatest wind energy along the East Coast, and you have plenty of instability out there too to fuel a severe weather threat through basically all of Wednesday before the sun sets, and eventually the system moves on. So this is a big deal, and I'm going to show you one more look at something I've been keeping an eye on. It's a little more sciencey, but bear with me as I pull it up. And here it is, and you know, if you've been following me, I don't hold back from showing you the real science, and I'll break this down for you so you can understand. We'll keep it simple. But if you look off to the top and the right here, you're seeing that curved red and pink line. That's a sign that there is spin in the atmosphere. That tells us tornadoes are favorable here. That gap between the white line and the red line here, that tells us that there is instability in the atmosphere. And these sticks here are telling us there's a lot of wind in the atmosphere as well. That owes to a damaging wind threat. And we certainly have numbers in the bottom corner here that are greater than 6. That owes to a large hail threat, although they're not super impressive. If anything here, this is telling me that tornado threat, first of all, is very real, and the damaging wind threat is also realistic as well. Large hail is possible too, for sure, just not as significant. And then here we are on the second day of this threat. The last one was for the first day. As we get these storms closer to the East Coast, there's still plenty of spin in the atmosphere, but we don't have as much instability. So this is telling me it may be more of a conditional tornado threat as this reaches the East Coast. Still certainly a threat. I wouldn't be surprised if the SPC drops like a 5% out there. But the very strong wind, very close to the surface, tells me this will be largely a damaging wind threat. And numbers here do support the potential for some large hail, but I expect the wind is going to be our biggest concern as we get into the second day as a result of some of the data I'm seeing here. Kind of feel like we need a second to debrief here. That was a lot. All right, we're good. Diving into temperatures now, because this is a big part of our weather story too. And you're going to find as we start off March, severe weather is not the only volatile thing in our atmosphere. The temperatures are going to be all over the place. So I'm taking you through those anomalies, how much warmer or colder they'll be relative to average. Then we're going to take a look at the actual numbers on the ground. So keep an eye out for that. But let me show you first of all what we're going to see as we begin the month of March. Here's that first weekend. Get a little bit of warmth on the east, but that's temporary as this cold air swings in and knocks it out. Meanwhile, in the west, we're talking about a torch, very warm, to begin that first weekend of March, at least temporarily. This is all going to change, so just keep watching. Here we are. Again, that's the first weekend. There's your cold air. There's your warm air drifting east. And what's this? That's actually part of our next storm system, knocking out that warm air out west, and we see this whole pattern shift. Look at that. In a number of days, in about 2 days, it totally flips. March 4th and 5th, this is as our severe weather system comes through. Colder air is going to fill in on the backside. Meanwhile, you got this warm air out east on the front side of it. That's helping to fuel the severe weather risk, at least in the southeast. And so as we get through that system and behind it, what ends up happening is we get into a pattern again where the cold air settles in the east coast and the warm air settles in out west. This is now the second weekend of March, the 8th and the 9th. I'd move this on farther, but there are so many flips and flops, it would probably get more confusing than helpful. So that's what we're looking at to start the month. But how does that translate to actual temperatures? Why don't we take a look? So here's your first weekend of March. Anywhere you're seeing those green colors, those are temps generally in the 40s and 50s. Oranges and yellows are 60s, 70s, and 80s. And those blues are temperatures in the 10s and 20s. So you have a pretty big gap here between the northeast where that cold air swings in and the south where temperatures are staying largely in the 80s for this first weekend, and 70s. We'll say 80s might be a little aggressive. But here we are heading into Sunday. Most of the U.S. is pretty mild unless you're in the northeast. Sorry, guys. That includes me, though. So Boo-hoo. Then we get into the week here, and remember that everything sort of flips. So as we head into your Tuesday and Wednesday, here's your severe weather threat in the south, by the way. Those are temperatures in the 60s and 70s, pretty far north, and remember, dew point's pretty high too, so it's humid air as well. Meanwhile, in the west, we're going to see that colder air come in out of Canada while that severe weather threat is ongoing. So as I move this into your Wednesday, you'll see that pattern flip here. Again, there's your colder air showing up. Those are temps in the 30s and low 40s, largely out west. And we still have that milder air riding up the east coast here. Won't bring severe weather to the northeast, but it will bring some milder temperatures and rain. Then we get that pattern to continue to flip. Here we are heading into the end of that week and the second weekend of March. You're seeing the warm air settle in back in the central U.S. and the west. And the east is going to be stuck with temps that are having a hard time getting out of the 50s, even down into the southeastern U.S. It's going to be on the chillier side of things. That's your Saturday. Here's your Sunday. Again, pretty clear the divide in the United States right here. Our jet stream, of course, going to be kind of going like this and allowing that warm air to move northwards into the west and the cold air to move southwards into the east. So, it's typical spring. It's up and down, but certainly it's going to be a week where you don't want to get too used to any kind of weather. Welcome to the U.S. in the month of March, right? All right, last thing I want to show you is the chances for snow, and we'll also talk about the rain here across the U.S., sort of those side missions, if you will. I don't know why I call them side missions. So what we're seeing is basically the first weekend of March. We have a clipper system that'll bring some snow to the northeast. The rest of the U.S. is pretty quiet as we go through that first weekend, at least until we get into the start of the week. That's when we begin to see our trough, that colder air begin to arrive in the western U.S. out here. That's eventually going to be the impetus for severe weather in the south and central and southeast U.S., but it is pretty quiet until we get to that on Monday and Tuesday. And there is your mid-latitude cyclone, your low-pressure system forming. You got your warm front out here. You got your cold front actually trailing back here. And you got a dry line that's sort of in between right here. And it's that dry line that will initiate the storms first. So pretty complex system, but you can see all the storms that form here on your Tuesday and continue Wednesday. We're looking at what could be a pretty good squall line moving into the eastern U.S. That's what's going to provide that damaging wind threat. There may also be some snow in portions of the upper Midwest and into Canada on the backside of this, not the Northeast. The Northeast kind of gets screwed here. I'm actually kind of upset about it. We're going to get a lot of rain, but not really anything else. Maybe we're lucky if we get a rumble of thunder, but that's about it heading into Wednesday and Thursday. Once that system's out, there will be a couple little pesky guys just floating around. We got this low pressure system on the back end of this storm. I don't expect it's going to produce severe weather, but there could be some rain back in those same spots on the Friday that follows. It's going to try to become a stronger storm offshore here once it reaches the east coast. This will be something to watch because the northeast will be cold, so there is actually snow potential here on Sunday the 9th and Monday the 10th. This is that last or second weekend of March. Right now, our weather models are not so gung-ho on snow, but it's worth watching for now. But we're getting pretty far out and everything is more speculatory here, so we'll leave it at that for what we're actually seeing at the ground, but let me show you the snow potential and then we'll wrap things up. Okay, so here's our NBM. I'll put this in motion. We'll just play it forward, and it's basically giving us a rough idea of where snow may be most likely over these first week and a half of March, the first 10 days really. Plenty of activity out in the mountains in the west still. This is an area that has continued to be just hammered all winter long, and that's not going to change as we get through this first 10-day window. Those higher elevations, of course, have an easier time with snow. Could be some stuff that falls in the central U.S. here, some of it on the backside of that severe weather system, but really nothing significant. I mean, we're talking about what could be a couple inches over 10 days, so not a big deal out there. Better chances for snow are going to be off the Great Lakes, as we've seen all winter long. Basically, these areas produce, and the interior of the Northeast as well. It kind of looks like a chat bubble there, doesn't it? Look at that. But really, it's southern Canada and the interior of the Northeast along those Great Lakes that really has the best chance for any kind of snow. Again, speculative snow chances on the coastline of the Northeast, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. So again, you'll want to check back for updates as we continue to track that one as well. All right, guys, that's a lot. We're going to wrap it there. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and ask any questions you have in the comments. I'm happy to answer everything. I'm a meteorologist, so any of your complex questions, we can dive into whatever you want. And be sure to check back. We'll do some live stuff and really break out some higher level coverage as this severe weather threat increases. So, all right, stay safe. Check back here as we track it, and I'll see you back here next time.